what's the goal for the audit trail? The goal for audit trail is that we want to be able to track who and when inserted the data or last updated the data. And then we want to essentially, in this particular example, we want to focus on only those two parts, date, time, and user. And then, of course, what we're not going to cover in this thing is that, if you need to do journaling, if you need to create a log as users are doing, and if you want to keep a copy of the previous data, and so on. So I don't want to discuss that in this particular example. I'll just focus on who and when the data is inserted or updated. There are three different methods in order to use audit trail. One is two of them rely on the user interface, and the third one relies on data access layer. Like everything in life, there are advantages and disadvantages of using these three methods. The user interface method, one of them is to use hidden fields. It's very easy to do. You can do it within IronSpeed Designer, but obviously you have to do it on many pages, and then sometimes it may leave a blank space on the page that you may or may not like. In the case of another way to do that is utilize a little bit of a code customization, and obviously it has more flexibility than hidden fields, but of course the disadvantage is that it has to be done on many pages, just like the use hidden fields. Of course, it only has to be done on the add or edit pages. You don't have to do it on the show pages. The third way is that you can use the data access layer and utilize the code customization at that level. And the advantages, of course, applies to all inserts and updates when you do these things. But in some cases, you may need to require data that is only available at the user interface layer, as an example, and not available at a lower level of data access. So you may need to figure out a way to pass data back and forth in order to do the data access layer. So that's kind of the three ways of doing it. Let's cover each one of them. And instead of doing it in IronSpeed Designer, I'm just going to give you a presentation here so that you will have a copy of this thing at the end of this session and be able to download and go through that. So let's look at how our database schema looks like. Here's an employee table, and I have 4 audit fields. There's a created on, by, last updated on, and last updated by. And the created by and the last updated by are just text fields. I just want to, let's say, store the username there, for example, or the user ID there for the time being. And the created on and last updated on are just a date time field. What's our strategy to use hidden fields? Well, all we need to do is we need to add audit trail fields onto the page, and we'll talk about how to do that. And then on the page properties, I need to essentially mark the fields as visible, or essentially unmark the fields as visible so that they are not visible, and then set the initial value on the initial values tab. And then finally, I want to basically make sure that when there are no code changes that are necessary. The only caveat to note over here, minor caveat, which is fields are initialized when the page is displayed. So let's say, for example, you have initialized the created on, and the user opens up the add page and goes to go get a cup of coffee and come back, and then adds the record. It'll be the time when the page was first displayed, not when the page is actually going to be saved. For the most part, it probably doesn't matter, but just so that you know what is exactly happening over here. So how do I do it? First, I'm going to add the hidden fields using the panel wizard. I just simply add the created on and created by just by pressing the configure button and opening up the panel wizard and going to the fields tab. Next, what I do is for each particular field, like let's say, for example, I have the created on. If I double click on that, I'm going to come to the page properties dialog box. And what I need to do is do 3 things over here. Instead of a text box for that field, what I want to do, or a calendar control, I want to essentially change that to a literal. And I will uncheck the visible in order to hide. And finally, when I select it as a literal or a label, I'm going to get another option, which is whether to save the field to the database. By default, literal fields are obviously display fields and are not going to be saved into the database. So you want to make sure that the field is marked as something that is going to be saved into the database. By default, label and literal fields will not be saved in the database when a record is created or updated by default, because our assumption is that those are only display-only fields when you're using literal and label. You do those three things, and then you go to the initial value tab, and then what you do is essentially specify, for example, in this case, select current date and time. You have other options over here that you obviously can do, but this is essentially what you would need to do. And then, of course, what you want to do is repeat this for other fields. And then for logged in user ID or username, there are a whole bunch of functions available on system utils class. That's something in base classes that is part of your application. So you can just do me.page.systemutils.getLogin ID. And there are a bunch of other functions, get username, get user ID, and so on. And you can use any of these things, and you specify them very simply by essentially, so for the created by, I'm just going to use me.page.systemutils.getLogin ID. If your application is built in VB, use VB syntax. If your application is built in C#, use C# syntax there. We simply execute that line of code and then place the value there. So that's the first part of the customization, which is to use hidden fields. And now let's go on to the next method, which is the code customization. And the strategy over here basically is to override what we call the GetUIData at the record control method. And then one of the advantages, of course, as you know, is that audit trail fields don't need to be displayed to be set, and we can do that. So if you go back and look at the control hierarchy of a page, let's say if you're looking at an ad page, we create two classes shown in yellow over here, page and the record control class. And you can read the code customization tutorial for more details on these pictures. But generally, what we're going to do is we're going to make this code customization at the customer's record control class level, which corresponds to the specific record control that is displayed over here. And then if you look at the calling hierarchy of a page, you will notice that when you're saving the data, one of the things that we do is we call the GetUIData in order to retrieve the data from the user interface. So what you need to do is you need to override the GetUIData, call the underlying base GetUIData, because you want to essentially leave everything else as is, and then do your own customization. So how does that look like? If you override the GetUIData, the first thing you're going to do is going to call the mybase.getUIData, and then you're going to do your settings over here, like created on or last updated on, last updated by. I showed you both for initial creation as well as for subsequent save, but you only need to do two of those 4 lines at the bottom. So that's how easy it is for you to do a code customization in method 2. Method 3 is to do it at the database level. Well, what can you do at this level? What our strategy would be to handle 2 events that are thrown when records are being inserted or being updated. So either we handle the inserting event or the updating event. And then you need to do this in a file in a business layer. So if you have a customers table, you will have a file called customersrecord.vb or CS, and it will be located in your myapp/appcode/business layer folder. And then what you want to do is essentially modify the record class. Record class is what we discussed earlier, is where we need to modify that, and we need to essentially change this, add 2 methods or 2 events for handling the inserting and updating events. And keep in mind that changes to this class will never be overwritten, so they're always going to be safe, no matter how many times you rescan your schema for changes. If there are fields that are dropped, then it's up to you to go back and modify those methods over there. This class derives from the base record class, which is the generated code, and the base class changes when schema changes, but derived class will never be modified. So your code is safe when you do that. How do you do that? Very easy. You handle mybase.inserting record event, and you simply have a function called, let's say, for example, audit insert. It takes a couple of arguments. And then in this particular case, what I need to do here is I need to set the created on with the date time now. And then the created by, I need to use a session over here because I don't have access to the user interface layer over here. So this is one way you can transfer data between the user interface layer and the data access layer. I don't have access to the page object, for example, over here because I don't know which page this insert is coming from. It may not even come from a page. It may come from some other place, for example, through a web service or some other place. So it's important that, if I need to do this thing, you obviously will have to transfer the data through some other mechanism, and session is a good mechanism in order to transfer that. In this particular case, we are essentially saving the user ID. The update is very similar. The only difference is we're going to save last updated on and last updated by over here. And that's all I have for the audit trail. So what I'd like